Hello, welcome back, everybody. This is an episode that I am incredibly excited for because we have Wink on finally with us today. I think most of you watching know that this is a podcast that Chris and I and our organization, 1776 Forward, we produce in collaboration with the Institute for Liberal Values, which is headed by the indomitable Jennifer Richmond. And today we have her co-author on her latest book, Letters in Black and White, Wink. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who will give you the introduction to Wink, and we will get started.
Great. Thanks, Joia, and thanks, Wink. Hi, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Having a wonderful morning thus far. How are you doing?
We're doing great, and
Good.
as Joia said, so excited to have you, so thank you for being here. I'll just introduce for our audience, we've got Wink. Wink is short for Winkfield Twyman.
Yes,
He is a
that's
former,
correct.
and you prefer to go by Wink, right?
Yeah, it's less formal. It's more personable. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's such a great, unique name. Wink is a former law professor born in Richmond, Virginia, and came of age in the New South of the 1970s. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia and Harvard Law School, and he's the author of the newly acclaimed book, which Joia just mentioned, Letters in Black and White, A New Correspondence on Race in America, which is co-authored by ILB's very own Jennifer Richmond. His essay in the Pennsylvania Lawyer magazine inspired the posthumous admission in 2010 of the first Black lawyer in New York State, George Boyer Vashon. Did I say that right?
Vashon.
Vashon's, thank you.
Yeah.
To the Pennsylvania State Bar, which had denied him twice in 1847 and 1868. And Wink, also among his many other activities, is one of the leaders of Free Black Thought. So with that introduction, Wink, we like to start out by hearing the origin story of our leaders or heroes in free speech. So however they came about, why don't you tell us how you did get on the cause of standing up and speaking out for free speech? Mm-hmm.
If there are two Jewish people talking, you'll hear three opinions. And I added, well, if you hear three Black Americans talking, you'll hear one opinion. Sad but true to some degree. Sad but true to some degree. So we need to platform more diversity, more viewpoint diversity in the public square, I think. I think that's healthy. But notice, how often do you hear someone with my attitudes platformed on, say, MSNBC or CNN? Or
right.
Not really, not a lot. And I wonder why that is. No. But anyway, who knows? But hopefully I answered your question. Yeah.
No, that was great. Thank you. And it's funny that you use the term mass formation, because that term has definitely been invoked, I think, and be popularized in the last few years in pandemic context, in kind of the race relations context within the U.S. and the Western world. So in some ways, even Joia's and I getting started with 1776 Forward was our own act back in that what we call year of chaos and turbulence of 2020, when that phenomenon reached its height in many ways. It was our own act of defiance and speaking out so that others would know that they're not alone if they, are objecting to the mass formation that was going on.
Can I ask you a question, if I might?
Sure,
a quick question?
Yes.
What is it about the two of you that enabled you to not be rendered silent by mass formation? What was it within your character or temperament that enabled you to have the clear-headedness and foresight to think, yeah, we need to hear something else out there, a different viewpoint? What is it about you? Personality? Is it environmental, cultural, family? What was it?
That's a great question. Joia, do you want to go first? Or you want me to take it?
As I flip the tables.
No, that's great. It's an open discussion always on our podcast.
So I think I was always the kind of person, I was always interested in ideas, big ideas. Part of my background was I was raised religious. And so maybe similar to your story where you grew up on a street where everybody shared the same last name.
Right.
I grew up in a town where everybody shared the same religion. And it was eye-opening to me when I was in 6th grade and I discovered mythology of all things. And I bet it was even significant that it was like Greek and Roman mythology, so essentially a religion that nobody believes in anymore. But when I realized that people used to believe in this, that this was someone else's religion, and it was so different from the religion that I was raised in, it made me aware that there were so many other religions out there. And it was through that idea of the diversity of religions that I really got into thinking about the diversity of thought. I went down rabbit holes in philosophy, learned a lot about critical thinking, became enamored with figures like Socrates. And I also say that it helps that I made some really good friends. So people who know the show probably know that Chris and I met each other when we were in college and both kind of shared this love for philosophical inquiry and critical thinking. And it definitely helps to have, a good friend that you can bounce ideas off of too.
I love that story. And Chris, what's your story?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I take a page from your playbook in terms of the family roots, and this really where you see the role of an environment and influence, especially early on. I grew up in a family that my parents were both very intellectual and philosophical minded and just always encouraged us to think for ourselves and ask questions. We had political debates around the table, and they were often heated, but not disagreeable, like you said, like described. So that inculcated in me at an early age a questioning spirit and an independent spirit, and that just as that grew over time, it kind of evolved and grew into a conscious love of liberty and kind of the broader philosophy and values of freedom, to the point where when all of that craziness was going on in 2020, to me, the thought of being locked down literally or mentally or emotionally or anything else was like, it's like not being able to breathe, So to me, speaking out was an act of breathing in a way, self-expression of like saying, this is not how I live, or, and there's probably a contrarian streak in me as well, but it's mostly comes from just a deep rooted, going back to my childhood love of, just a free spirit, I guess you could say.
I love that. I love those answers. So maybe the three of us will be part of the vanguard of a better way going forward.
Well, that's certainly how we think about what we're trying to achieve with 1776 forward. Modest goals, right? But vanguard for
change the world.
Exactly. Well, that you have to have that kind of optimism and ambition to stand up and speak out. But
I love that word. I love that word, optimism. I find that people who love free speech tend to be more optimistic and joyful than those who do not love free speech. And I'm not sure why that is, but I find that a rough correlation sometimes there. If someone is a real scowl, I tend to think you're not really going to be down with free speech. So,
I think though there is something psychologically to the idea of there is a kind of maturity, and and maybe it even happens. It sounds like for us, it happened, luckily from perhaps the environments we lived in at a young age, but a kind of maturity to be able to recognize that there can be different viewpoints, and there can be, as you pointed out, like I like the way you phrased it, heated disagreement, but without disagreeableness. Like there's a kind of maturity to be able to kind of, as they say, like entertain different ideas, but without having to necessarily, hold on to them. I feel like people who are kind of, boxed in by dogma, I think it is confining and restrictive, and it's an unfortunate way to live. Back to your point, Wink, that there's, I think, a better way for people to live if they can start to embrace this other attitude. And maybe this segues into our next question for you, because we can see both from the example of this podcast that you are a wonderful speaker and you're obviously great at writing, particularly letter writing, we know from your
lawyer
book.
I try.
So maybe you can help help our audience who perhaps hasn't yet reached that fluency and facility with language. Like maybe you can give just some words of advice for how you think about when you're going to speak out or write something. Like, what is it that helps you become an effective speaker, presenter, writer?
That's a great question. It really is. So to answer that question, I'm going to give you two data points. So one, I was in a recent conference. I think it's Empower Education or something like that in Sacramento. Jen was there. Yes. And I was assigned the task of serving as a moderator for a panel on woke ideology and education. And I remember I had 2 months to prepare. And I really had this sense of I want to over prepare because I want to have enough information in my brain to slip up and still sound smooth and eloquent. So 2 months before the event, I remember scoping out exactly the key points I wanted to say, how much time I wanted each of the three panelists to have, the major themes I wanted to hit, major research topics that would support each idea. And I also wanted to be able to sound insightful after each panelist had spoken. So I drew up like a list of things, key insights to be able to draw upon at the end of each panelist's presentation. And so I did that, and I sent that to the panelists. And then a day or two before the actual event, I wrote out by computer, obviously, from start to finish everything, like everything I would say, like a speech. And I practiced that. I practiced reading that over 3 to 5 times so that I would nail down exactly how much time I had per panelist, because I only had 50 minutes, right, and 3 panelists. And so after practicing for 3 to 5 times, I felt good to go. And the thing is, you don't read what you've written. The value of over preparing is that you have the self-confidence to just talk extemporaneously. And I think that's a key to what I've found in terms of speech writing, quote unquote, is that I over prepare, I write it out fully from start to finish, but then I make a point of it to just speak extemporaneously and not read what I've written. Because the stuff is in your brain.
Right.
It's a matter of your brain just retrieving what's material and what's not in the moment. And then in terms of writing, that's a great question, writing. Here's an example. I have a Substack account. It's called Wink Substack. And I try to write essays every day. I've been doing it since March 23rd, 2023. That's right. So I've got over 600 essays on Substack. And I've gotten into the habit of writing every day. So one day, I was at Costco and I had no idea what I was going to write about. The idea well was dry. And so I reached out to Jen. I said, Jen, help me. I need an idea. What can I write about? And she was like, oh, well, I think you should do this and maybe you should do that. And I didn't like either idea. It just didn't ring with me. It didn't resonate. So I said, Jen's no help. And so I literally, before going to I think the food court at Costco, decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm a big proponent of the human condition, of authenticity in writing, of being genuine. I'm just going to write about my past 24 hours in life. And I did that over the course of the next 2 to 3 hours. That became my top Substack essay out of over 600. Just literally me reliving my life over the past 24 hours. But of course, I didn't just randomly do it, right? I got a Suzuki here and a pepperoni pizza there. No. I tied into the essay key themes that I wanted to convey to the reader. But the key was, what is it? Show, don't tell. And so I made a point of showing encounters that related my key points, which was, my main thesis was, I really don't have my race consciousness switch turned on as a matter of course. Someone or something in the outside world has to turn on my race consciousness switch for me to notice and see race. So I began the essay by saying, okay, I'm going to turn my race consciousness switch on and then observe life, the human condition over 24 hours. And that's what I did. And it was kind of nice. So
wow, those are 2 great pieces of advice that we haven't ever heard on this podcast, and I feel like I could use those too. So thank you.
I think I'm definitely going to steal both of those for the next time we have to speak. And also write
go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Did I hear you?
I didn't know you actually had a Substack. I'm definitely going to check it out. Chris and I are launching one for 1776 forward, so we're going to have to take some of these ideas and start putting them
for sure.
Outstanding.
And did I hear you name drop a Suzy Q in there?
Well, that's a great question. Let me begin by thanking you for having me on this podcast. I suspect that my values are well aligned with the purposes and aims of the podcast, 1776 Forward. I was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1961 in a segregated all-Black hospital, St. Mary's. I would grow up until the age of 8 on Twyman Road. And that's kind of interesting because my last name is Twyman. It was a family road in a sense. Everyone who lived on Twyman Road was a relative. So uncles
Oh,
and
wow.
cousins and aunts. So really, until the age of 8, I kind of thought the universe was related to me, which is kind of an interesting way to come into the world if you think about it. But it raises an interesting question. How did coming into the world thusly give rise to my passion and love for freedom of speech? Well, it's quite easy in a sense. Some of my earliest memories are of being at Grandma's house. Grandma, Rosanelle Brown Twyman Jackson, lived
Mm.
up the hill, up Hickory Hill. And I had 15 uncles on my mother and father's side. And I can just remember wonderful meetings at Grandma's house when my uncles would debate issues of the day, policies of the day. And there was never any conforming. If I had 15 uncles at Grandma's house, I could hear 15 different opinions about anything under the sun. I
Mm.
enjoyed it. I reveled in it. It was like a virtual seminar, if you will, on how to disagree without being disagreeable. So that was sort of the core concept and idea I took from those family sessions. And so the idea of freedom of speech was just part of my identity as I came of age as a little one. So I would, in a sense, view it as odd when people no longer felt that way, because that's kind of how I
Mm.
learned to understand the world. The world was to be a little kid with your giant uncles debating this, that, and the other, having a ball, enjoying the ins and outs, the nuance and complexity of argument. And when all was said and done, remaining brothers, hugging, shaking hands, and calling it a day. To me, that was a good life, a life well lived.
It's a beautiful family story too of how this family could come together and stay familial and friendly in spite all of the disagreements. And it hurts my heart a little bit because I think of all the people, perhaps especially growing up today, who do not have an experience like that at all, who grow up in an atmosphere where there is just conformity, not only amongst all their family members, but probably amongst all of their friends, their peer groups, their teachers. And I bet some of those people wouldn't even begin to understand why free speech is so important for a flourishing family life, a flourishing society, and for just an individual personally. So
Sure.
what would you say to someone about why free speech is so important to flourish both as a family, as a group, as society, and as an individual?
That's a great question. And there's so many great answers to that great question. Some that
Hmm.
come to mind. When you allow people to debate openly and freely without fear, what you do is you make everyone smarter and wiser because you're able to have the benefit of 15 different viewpoints, for example, as opposed to one viewpoint. If everyone has to think the same way, then you're going to miss blind spots in discourse. You're going to miss imperfections. And moreover, you're going to be cowed into self censorship. I think that when the opposite is the case, when there's a wide range of opinions and viewpoints out there, you become wiser, you become smarter, you become more self confident because you can express yourself and recognize at the end of the day, you're still part of the human family, the human condition. So I
Hmm.
think that's a benefit, if you will, of freedom of speech. Another benefit of freedom of speech is it simply protects us from group think. There's a phenomena developed by psychologists in Belgium. I think it's called mass formation. The idea is that when people begin to subscribe to dogma without critical examination or self examination, it becomes a greater and greater force for conformity. And therefore, you run a greater and greater risk of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and simply squeezing out those who are dissidents. So, but the best way to prevent that psychological dysfunction is for those who disagree to always speak up, because that way, people who remain silent know, well, I'm not alone. There are other people who think that's a little sketchy or that's suspect, uh, and that's good. So you do society a good um, what's the word? Do society a good thing when you speak up during times of conformity, because then you reassure those who are silent that they're not alone. And that ultimately is the best and important part of freedom of speech, is that we're not all alone. And I often say, if there are over 40 million Black Americans, there are over 40 million life stories, experiences, and perspectives. And we forget that wisdom. We don't really tend to view race and Blackness in America that way. There's an old joke. Someone, I forget who it was, maybe David L. Bernstein of JILV, said, I used to love
Uh,
Suzy Q's when I was a little
oh,
kid.
they're my favorite, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
find them anywhere.
I know, it's horrible. It's awful. It's horrible.
It
Chris,
really
what shall we
is.
do?
You sometimes have to go into like a corner gas station, like
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
the middle of nowhere to find them. So
It's one of
they're a
my
relic.
addictions. I love
Yes,
sweets.
same. That's so
I'm
funny.
trying to, yeah, I know. So, yeah.
So one, for we're almost out of time, but as a last question, we love this one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Is kind of removing constraints and using our imagination to its wildest possibilities. And given your long life history of working on free speech and thinking about it, I'd love to know, if you didn't have any resource constraints, where you would think the best investment could be made to improve a culture of free speech in the society.
Well, that's a great question. All your questions are great, Chris and Joia. I would buy MSNBC and start anew. Too many people are exposed to dogma and slogan words. Thousands of viewers every day. That's what I would do. I would start from scratch.
So
So,
media
yeah,
impact then.
yeah,
Awesome.
definitely, yeah.
Well, I
And
mean, oh, go ahead.
oh, okay. Well, I was going to say I don't want to preempt your final question, but it was interesting because I think your final question that you were going to pose to me concerned what I advise other
Well,
people who
yeah,
might
general
aspire
finding your
to.
courage. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, and I thank you so much. You used the word, I think, leader once or twice in your email to me. I never think of myself as a leader. I really don't. I'm too creative. I'm too much of an introvert. I am an introvert. I'm too annoyed with dogma and slogan words. I think of myself more as someone who loves truth telling. Like, I can remember in my life meeting genuine truth tellers and feeling a sense of inner alignment. For example, I felt that way when I sat beside Harvard University professor Roland Fryer 2 years ago at a retreat in Manhattan. It was just that sense of inner tonality, that this is someone who's driven by truth telling. I felt that way a month or two ago when I met, what's her name? Salome Sibone, the Black Sheep. She has a podcast.
Okay.
And Jen and I had a chance to meet with her. She was a truth teller. And I remember thinking at the end of that, wow, that there's something divine there in you. So my point is, in terms of advice for other the people who might aspire to be free speech writers or thinkers, the most important thing, I think, is you have to find your courage. You have to find your courage. Because if you are going to be a great, authentic writer, you can't write for the aunt behind your shoulder. You can't write for the mob outside your door. You have to really kind of separate yourself from the world and write as if you're already deceased, if that makes sense. A famous South African writer, Nadine Gordimer, I think, said that. You want to kind of write for yourself the greatest truth that you can find. Ernest Hemingway once said, write the truest sentence you can. And I think that's a big part of it, is to find the courage to write and to be authentic and to be genuine. Avoid dogma, avoid slogan words, because then you come across as contrived, as if you're filtering yourself from the world through certain words. Remember my wonderful 24-hour essay experience? There was no
Yeah.
filter. I just
Yeah.
turned my little racial consciousness switch on and just wrote whatever. There was no fear, no anxiety. Ultimately, my parting words to those who aspire to become free speech writers or speakers or leaders: remember this. When people pass away, the most common refrain they will say isn't, oh, I wish I had conformed more. Oh, I wish I had more followers on Facebook. No. The most common thing people say on their deathbed would be the following: I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. If you remember that as a writer, you will go well, you'll do good, and you'll leave a good lasting impression. That's my thought.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you for that.
Oh, sure, sure.
And I think that is a beautiful example of leadership, as I hope people follow that example and decide to step into the role of truth tellers themselves, with you
Yeah,
showing the way.
Yeah.
certainly one of the themes. I know you highlighted the word leader, and that was intentional by us because I
Okay.
think one of our missions even is to help reimagine the concept of leadership, and that we're
Mm.
building a not only a movement but a society of leaders among leaders. When
Ah.
you think about individualism and in a free society and what all that
Mm-hmm.
entails, and you can certainly check out this, a little plug for 1776 Forward, our statement on our website, which talks through, at least Joy's and my vision on what that means.
Yeah.
um, I think it really calls, we're not meant to be followers, right? In whatever domain of influence you have in your own life as an individual, you can be a leader. And so we like the notion of leaders among leaders, and that's certainly a notion we're championing. So we commend you for being a leader in your own life and, on these critical values.
Wow. Well, thank you. I'm so flattered. I'm not sure what to say other than this. Whatever I do, I'm always driven by my curiosity. I always want to understand the universe better. And at this point in my life, could change, but at this point in my life, I think if one can strive for human dignity, creative expression, and love for the individual, you can't go wrong on the yellow brick road to truth. That's what I think.
So well said. Well, thank you, Wink. This
Well,
has been
thank
an
you guys.
amazing conversation.
This has been good.
And we, as always, you can find our podcasts on most audio streaming platforms under ILV's Dissidents podcast channel, on our YouTube page, and linked from our website. So we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Thanks again for your time, Wink, and we'll
Outstanding.
see you next time, everybody.
Take care. And thank you again.